This is the AI-assisted organization podcast hosted by myself, Piers and my co-host and co-founder of Implement AI, Dr. Aalok Shukla. He's just spent, about 3 weeks meditating. Your- your
Not the whole
trip
3 weeks,
around.
but it was good. It was good. Yeah.
It's amazing, actually. You feel refreshed.
Yeah, definitely. Great trip to India.
It's not ideal for doing sales calls and similar
No.
times. Okay. And what have I been up to, really? I won an award, Diversity Champion of the Year at the European Diversity Awards. I have to say, it's my work with Sky. It's a massive, but welcomed surprise. So again, the podcast, we've been tweaking with the format of it, and there's been a huge amount going on, and we're going to talk about sort of news, but not really go through the news in sort of detail. Really, there's lots of kind of big systemic news. Really, things like we're going to talk about things like computer use, the way AI is changing. But I think the theme, Alok, isn't it, is that you had the UK budget as well, and I've been sort of posting about that, about the impact on so our politicians saying that we want to protect workers, but by increasing costs of labour, someone's got to pay the tax bill somewhere, but by increasing the cost of labour, my view is that that's going to have an obvious outcome, which is going to be accelerating the demand and the need to automate. I mean, we're already behind in terms of productivity. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And we'll talk about the US. So the US, got kind of Manhattan Project style approach to AI, because AI is sort of, the winner takes all. We had not Mark Zuckerberg, Sam Altman, just casually mentioned in an interview the other day. Someone asked him, what are you looking forward to in 2025? And he said, I'm looking forward to AGI. I'm looking forward to that. And that's just like a sweeping statement that could change the direction of the whole of mankind in a way. So we're going to talk a bit about that, really, and then come back to what that means for us, what that means for businesses.
Yeah.
Well, look, so we had the budget, and there was a lot of going on about that. I sort of posted quite a bit about the likely impact is going to be pressure on jobs. Immediately, it might be for the old reasons. A lot of people are on sort of low paid work. Maybe they're working in hospitality or care, or they're cleaning and maintenance, whatever that might be. They're typically roles that you can't easily automate yet, because they tend to be quite physical. But a lot of the kind of management of that, and increasingly you will be able to automate it, is you are going to see a pressure to automate. And I think, and I wrote a newsletter today as well that went out, that the issue here is that policymakers, politicians, employers, even individuals, they're not seeing the big picture of where this is going. And what they're doing, again, in my newsletter, I was saying that Sam Altman again said that when you look at the past, it always looks flat on an exponential curve. When you look at the future, it looks sort of vertical. And I don't think we're kind of getting it. We're still looking at the past, thinking, no, that's how the future is going to continue, and extrapolating from it. Whereas actually, the future in many ways is going to be quite detached from the past in terms of the speed of technological advancement.
Yeah, we're at another inflection point, really. If we think about where we are now, so like obviously like November, 2024, right now the systems have become much more powerful, and kind of two things have happened. Government in the UK is like making announcements as if it's like been any other era before, where the cost will go up, businesses will adopt to it, and everything will continue as usual. But that's just going to be not the case anymore, basically, because like what's happening now is like the rising power of these systems. I mean, we talked about briefly on computer use. Like, do you want to explain a little bit about what that is, essentially? Like,
so this was one of them. I mean, we do a lot of research in AI. We develop AI agents and deploy them in businesses. And I was doing a keynote event called AI Transform a couple of weeks ago. And we were going to talk about this a bit earlier, but we kind of left it a few weeks to see how it kind of plays out, because we're also testing it. And Anthropic, who developed Claude AI, which is great, good as ChatGPT. If I haven't used it in many ways, some ways better for coding, for example. And they launched something called computer use. So simplistically, what this means is, think about what a human does at a computer. Okay, so humans got a brain. There's some intelligence, and they have hands, so they can type and click things. And you use two inputs really. One is a keyboard, and one is a mouse. So typically, if you look at things like robotic process automation in the past, Alok, you've got more experience than I have, it'd be in a browser. Well, now what you want to be able to do is have an AI be able to use a computer. What that means is they can then use and interact with anything on a computer. So anything in a browser, applications. So, for example,
Files stored on the computer.
file storage, installing things. So you want to be able to say to an AI, go and tweak this Excel spreadsheet, and it can open Excel, the application, not in a browser necessarily, find a cell, click on the cell, and enter information into the cell. It can open any application and use email, right? And the way it works now is a little bit clunky, and it'll get better, is that it takes screenshots.
Yeah.
So take a screenshot, it looks at the screen, because obviously we've got computer vision now. AIs can understand anything essentially. Look at the screen, understand what's on the screen and what's where. Then it can direct the mouse, the cursor essentially, to go and click on things.
This is
Now,
the key point.
of course, they can type at superhuman speeds already. So the point is, that morning, for the first time in quite a long time in AI, I thought, once they perfect this, which they will, because ChatGPT, OpenAI, are looking at launching it as well, is that AIs can now use computers and software.
This
Has
is now
profound
this is
implications, isn't it?
yeah, this is now basically a step towards being a remote worker. So
Yeah,
before, if you
exactly.
think about like ChatGPT or whatever, you open up the browser, you type something in, you copy paste something in and out. It will only work when you're working, basically, right? Now with these AI systems, they could actually work even without you prompting it potentially, and even doing things outside its current environment, like you said, using different windows, running tasks on a specific repeated basis per week. Also, ChatGPT, OpenAI, they've introduced the system to the desktop application, for example, for the Mac, where you can give it access to other applications. So that's step one of computer use. Right now, it's coding applications, so you don't have to copy paste the code into it. But I think the key thing here in this inflection point is, if the cost of labor is going up, businesses have to plan their budget for next year. They need to be thinking about, okay, even without doing anything, I'm already behind now, basically, right? So the question is, what do I need to change? What do I need to reorganize? What do I need to look at in order to kind of get to where I want to get to? And if in parallel, they can already see, like you said, in an exponential world, computer use is starting, these things are starting. This is where like all businesses really have that strategic imperative right now to almost audit their functions and understand, okay, based on where the technology is right now, what is possible? Based on where the technology will likely be within 6 months, what will become possible? And based within the technology will become within a year and a half, what will be possible, basically? And I think this is one of the key things, because we are now at this threshold where it is now becoming viable to automate more and more stuff. And with these things like computer use, it means that like things that was previously out of bound, you couldn't do, you can do that now.
Yeah, and I think that what people, it's quite hard to explain to people that these things are announced, they show the demo. I think because we're sort of more involved in developing these things, we can kind of see where it's going. You're absolutely right as well. There's an opportunity here to get ahead of the typical sort of incrementalism, and you want to be sort of be revolutionary. And I think you made the point there, which is absolutely right, is that you can't look at this technology as it is today. You've got to look at computer use, and you've got to start extrapolate in your mind. It's very hard to extrapolate
Let me give an
exponentials from
example.
human.
When you hire a person, okay, you have to onboard that person. You've got to spend 3 months maybe training them, getting them culturally aligned, helping them understand all the different elements in your business, and then you start to get a return investment from them potentially a little bit later. With these AI systems, like I say, you have to think about it the same way, right? Like if you're hiring something, you embed it in your system. But the difference is a human will improve to a certain degree, then plateau. Once you kind of integrate into different AI systems into different workflows, they will keep improving, basically, right? And the ability to improve those areas becomes much better. So the key point here is like where you have to.
Well, you're not improving them. So with a human, you're improving the human with training and
Yeah,
experience.
but there's a
With
limit.
the AIs, but with the AIs though, the developers of the AI is improving the capability at the hardware and the software and the computational level. So it's as if your human is evolving at
Correct.
exponential speed in front of your very eyes. But the point is, let me finish the point though, is that if you do look that far ahead, let's just take computer use as one example, and as intelligence gets better and better, which it is doing, that means that, what does a human do? Most humans do at work, right? They sit at a computer and they take information from one application, they think about it, and they add it to another one, or they transpose it, or they do something, or they send an email, they respond to it. And this technology increasingly within 12 months, 24 months, will be able to do that. So there are a huge amount of, as you said, remote worker, knowledge work jobs that computer use is going to make redundant.
Yeah, and this is the key point, right? Like if the frictions of labor are increasing and the frictions to deploy AI and automation are decreasing, it's just going to tip one way basically. But I think the key thing is businesses need to understand, even if they keep their team the same, you need to understand the new possibilities and potential available from you from these different systems, because the key thing is you could start disrupting your own industry, start unlocking better experiences for your customers and different things like this, because this is where the opportunity is. In most industries everything is stagnant. You've got the winners, you've got everything's been stagnant for years. This is the window where everything has opened up again, so the key thing is to be able to get ahead.
Yeah, and we talk to lots of companies, don't we? And they often say, well, the technology means you can do this now, and they look at it and say, well, and sometimes it's automating an existing process, but often the way they're doing it doesn't quite gel with the AI. And what we're saying to them is, well, if you think about it, you need to reinvent your process and do it this
Or
way,
optimize it.
or optimize, because it's going to make a massive difference. A lot of people, they kind of look at it and think, do I want to do that? But the key is to really think ahead and think about, and let's move on to like the US is think ahead and think, where is this going and who's your competition? And what we're competing against, and moving on slightly, is you saw the election in the US, you saw Elon Musk is kind of, I think he seems to be running the country now. But the difference there is that kind of group of people, the kind of PayPal mafia, you want to call it that, they are looking at this as more like a Manhattan project where
Yes.
winner takes all. So we, and again, I don't think this is going to filter down to the average US or SME anytime soon, but the big players get that this winner takes all. So they are absolutely going at this, guns blazing. In my newsletter, I wrote about Microsoft, that Microsoft has just literally helped a company by funding it, essentially recommission 3 Mile Island, right, which was the site of the US's largest nuclear disaster. And so and Microsoft have agreed to take 25 years of power output from a nuclear power station, right? So what does that tell you? What are they thinking? What do they see that most people don't? What they see is a future where there's going to be a huge demand for power to power these data centers. Now, hopefully, AI solves nuclear fusion, so they won't need nuclear power. But they're looking that far ahead. And most nation states, businesses, and individuals just aren't. They're looking back at the past and thinking, well, let's extrapolate it 3 or 5 or 10% next year. And what we're saying in this podcast is, and it is, I think we're getting more and more sort of a fervent about it, is that this is a massive opportunity, but also a massive threat.
Yes, and the thing is, like, the point you want to look at is like how more and more intelligence, how more and more AI can be embedded into more and more processes within your business, because the costs are dropping. So, like, for example, like certain kind of proofs of concepts and things that you might get done now, within 3 months, 6 months, the cost of those will drop even further. So you can scale them up even more, doing even more. But the key thing is having everything in process so you can actually, benefit from it in the most way you can possible. Because like you said, we're in a basically a transition area where like now intelligence is going to become the new thing, and the question is like how can that be integrated into as many places as possible? I mean, the founders from Anthropic, they've got the same approach, and they're basically saying that like they see no immediate frictions to scaling and no immediate frictions to this system's increasing their power to a huge degree over the next 2 years, even now as they are implementing what is currently possible. There's a lot to do with that basically. So I think the key thing here is like this is almost like an inflection point. You have to like take stock and readjust, because you're going to need to start putting some implementation and some momentum, because the other thing you have to understand is it's not dependent solely on the technology. It's also based on your workflows and how your data is flowing through it. So what you need to do is set up these workflows with your own data and your own team flowing through it, so then you can start understanding what is required to almost cognify different tasks. And then from that, your own improvements will happen anyway, because as you see from the data coming through, what's coming back, you can improve those things. So then when the platforms also improve, you get 2 levels of improvement basically. But the problem you have to understand is that you can't put in like a jet engine into, if you haven't even built the chassis of a car basically, right? You've got to start putting the basics in place essentially.
And that's it. So we do our programs, but the point is that, as you said there, is set yourself up, create the foundations to try and, build what we call an AI assisted organization, hence the name of this podcast. And the point here is that, you're looking at computer use. Now, you just mentioned there, I think it was the CEO of Anthropic, wasn't he? He was on a podcast for like 5 hours.
Yes.
And he's there saying, look, and he's absolutely right, is that we think about artificial intelligence, right? If we were to sit here looking forwards and trying to forecast the future of technology 2 years ago, and we're talking about the things that we use every day now, you think we're insane. So the danger is that we belittle all these little incremental sort of changes and developments and launches. We say, oh well, before someone said that it would take 20 years for a machine to be able to see and understand our environment like a human, right? You can do that now. You can take a picture of a room or video, understand every object in that room,
There was
the
an
history
example.
of it, the background, how it's made, what the materials, more than I can actually understand. So it's moving quickly. And every time we see an advancement, we just go, oh, yeah, whatever. But it can't do this. And increasingly, what it can't do is becoming the smaller part of the equation, because the CEO of Anthropic said that he can't see, if you plot a line, which he was sort of struggling to do, he can't see why you won't get to what he calls sort of AGI, depending how you define it. Then you got Sam Altman talking about AGI. Now on this podcast, normally we go into detail on the mechanics of it and the detail and putting it to work. But I think it's really important now and then to try and stand back, take a macro view and reset the scene, so you understand that within that kind of that changing technological frontier, moving very, very quickly, what's possible. And you're seeing now that more and more is possible. But you're right, Alok, you've got to start with the basics.
You have to start, because the thing is that there's two things that are very important: the team membership, the team's mindset, and the leadership mindset about what's going to be happening, what's going to be possible. Establishing a clear vision for your company so people know they're going to be brought along the journey and different things like this. And the second thing is you have to have several different pilots running, because the key thing is nobody knows what will pull the most or what will work the most. And right now there's like at least 6 or 7 meaningful technologies which could be implemented in most businesses, which they should be running different pilots on, basically, right? Where they can see how it could be, running from either personalized content, or looking at in terms of like, internal automations, or looking at in terms of like real-time augmentation of different team members, or, many different areas. But the key thing is you've got to be running several different ones to start to see what's going to add the most difference, right? And we've seen from different businesses we worked with, very different opportunities worked for different ones, basically, right?
Well, what's interesting just on that is that you talk to an organization, we have calls with them, and they go for a program maybe, or they say, I want to deploy that AI agent. And when you talk to them, sometimes you realize that actually the opportunity is completely different. It's something that even once you've had some training, the more junior members of the team, of the workforce, actually spot things that senior management don't. So it's not always what you think is going to be, is it?
And it's also what's not being done currently, because before it was like too expensive to hire people.
Yeah.
So, for example, with some businesses I've talked with, like for example, let's call it the customer success function, where they've got like a technical product and their customers need to understand lots about it. But right now they've never had the kind of budget to be able to hire customer success people. They've got like instructions, but it's written in like basic, PDF form or on a website and stuff, and it's not easy to access. But nowadays with personalized content, with different interactive avatars, with even like personalized voice and different things like this, you could create much more interactive customer success materials where you can just ask the questions and be guided by the leaders of that business and different things like this. So there's opportunities which weren't there before. So that's not something that they're currently doing. But if your solution is easier to use for junior novices or into that system, then they're going to prefer that, basically, versus the competition. So you've got different vectors you can compete on now that you couldn't do before, but you need to test that. I mean, some businesses we've seen had huge success with digital avatars and like growing their business and doing different things like this. So the key thing I'm trying to say is that like it's not about just what you're doing right now, it's also what you're not doing because you couldn't do before, basically. And that's the key thing. You have to understand that.
And that goes back to my favorite 2x2 matrix, which is the complexity, technological kind of frontier, and then you've got the sort of ROI. And we always say that yes, you can. We had clients that have played in the top right box, which is the tech's not quite there yet, but when it does get there in 6, 12, 24 months, it's going to create an enormous ROI. So what they want to do is start using it now, developing the application, developing the workflow, developing the processes, so that when the technology kind of gets there, like computer use is a great example, in terms of PAs, for example, and when it gets there, you can then optimize your sort of cost base. But usually people play in the bottom left box, which is the technology is good at it, it's proven, it works, and there's an immediate ROI. And it can be things like you say that you already do that you can optimize, or quite often things that humans just can't do due to the scale and the nature of this technology and its capability. So look at your business, look at those quadrants and try and place different opportunities in it. And it's down to you really in terms of your time, resource, and your budget, where you want to start. But the point here is that Well, now, which it surprises me, and on this podcast, it's we want to really get it across is that the CEOs of these companies, right, and it depends how you define it, but they're now openly talking about AGI, right? And I know
Yeah.
I know it can get like lots of noise and people get frustrated as AI, AGI, ASI. It's all the same. Who cares? Just to be clear, today AI is a tool. Okay, just like
Let me
all the
give you an
tools for
example.
human history. Hang on a minute. From 2001 Space Odyssey, smashing the bone, the ape, to PCs, the tools. Humans use them to do things. AGI is different. That's where it replaces the human intellect, the human knowledge, the human ability to think, and then it can do anything that we can do. If you put that into a very capable robot, no matter what the form factor is, it can then do things physically. But AGI means that technology can do anything we can do in terms of cognitive labor.
Yeah, so like, I think if you think of that interim step from like where the AI is right now to, let's call it AGI on the other side, the interim step is like where there is an AI which is beyond PhD level. Let's call it like the smartest, beyond the smartest state.
Nobel Prize with yeah.
Your Nobel Prize level, basically, call it that, right? Like of IQ. So like 200 plus IQ or 195 IQ. What does that mean? I was watching an interview the other day actually, and it was on YouTube. It was basically this guy called Chris Langan, and he's called the smartest man in the world, basically, and he's got literally one of the highest IQs ever. I started watching it. Within 3 minutes, I'm like, I'm out of my depth here. Like the precision with which he can define terms, and he's talking about this and that, and across multiple disciplines to chemistry to mathematics, and the ease and dexterity he can describe these things. And I was just thinking to myself, like, this is 195 IQ or 200 IQ, whatever you're going to call it, right? AI like this is going to be like this for everybody to have access to those things. So imagine when those sorts of, in that sort of intelligence accesses your marketing department or your finance department or your sales department or your management department, all the things that are unlocked from that, basically, right? Because you can ask, if you could ask him questions and he would give you much better descriptions about what you're facing in that regard. So that is coming soon. That's before AGI, basically, right? That's coming soon.
Also, it's the point about software as a service. So I work with quite a few software companies, SaaS companies, and they're the ones that I tend to sort of get involved with. That they're embedding it at the core, whereas a lot of them are just adding, oh, it can do summarization, and it's around the periphery. But you think about, in within 24 months, you can sit at your device or not sit at your device because you can use computer use. You can just talk to your device from wherever you are and say, can you go and put together a list from our CRM of all the customers with this profile? And can you set up a nurture campaign and send me some draft email copy and images that you think would be suitable, which it will do. You can then sign them off, and it will then put the campaign together and write the code to execute it. So very, very soon you start to realize that if you can write software on the fly to complete and undertake tasks in a specific way, the way you want it done, it changes completely the whole software model. And
Exactly.
again, organizations don't seem to be fully grasping the speed at which this is changing, and neither the policymakers.
Even like, for example, someone with a business where they have to put together lots of documentation and like risk assessments and different things like this before they can do anything. And right now that requires a new employee or contractor to understand all the different risk assessments and everything possible. Now there are some SaaS solutions which will have, you can search for a library of it, but you got to ask it what you want, basically. And if you don't know what you're asking for, you won't get it, basically. But the way it's going to go is that most businesses could then spin up their own document agent, have it customized, be able to do the documents you want to do, could even guide the person, like, what do you want to do next? Oh, I want to do this task. Okay, you're going to need this and this, basically. The investments to create those, if you imagine, like, for example, training, if you think of the training budget for most companies, right? Reallocate your training budget to training your own AI systems. You understand? Like, you're going to get a much bigger ROI because everybody will be able to access that in the same way they possibly could, right? Because you still need to train people, but if you create systems which can train people and guide people in real time and nurture them, you're going to be in a much better place, basically, right? Because rather than in the experience and insight being someone that's then lost if they move on, you're then going to be able to retain much more knowledge, essentially.
Yeah, so I think going back to this podcast, so the sort of theme of it really is that So so typically most SMEs, which is what we tend to focus on, really. Some of our clients are quite big at 500 million in revenue. They're still kind of struggling with productivity. Productivity is a huge issue, especially in the UK, but in most sort of first world economies. But in the UK, big issue. The cost of labour are going up. You can't always use artificial intelligence to do a lot of these roles quite yet. What you can do though is perhaps change how you deliver services, maybe difficult physical services. But what's going to happen though, I think, is that Alok is that, and we've looked at this in sort of in a nascent way, is robotics. So increasingly, you're looking I was looking at Boston Dynamics the other day, the famous Atlas robot, the new one's amazing, but you can't buy it yet. They're still testing. But the quadruped, the one that lets you move boxes around the warehouse, I think it's called a Reach or something like that, they're becoming very, very good. And I think what you want to look at, and what we're sort of looking at as well, is how can you start using technology to deploy machines to complete physical tasks. And that's going to make a big difference. But I think between now and then, I think the middle ground and the biggest change is going to be this computer use. But how do you see that evolving there? Because right now, it's still quite clunky, isn't it? It's taking pictures, responding to it. You
No, I
almost
mean,
want it to be in real time.
so I think the key thing to understand is that like these are for tasks which need to be done but aren't necessarily time sensitive. Let's call it that, right? So imagine, like, let's say, for example, log into the system, run these reports, download these reports, check them to see if there are any of these issues that are happening, like a QA check or whatever like that, right? You can do with those sorts of things. If it's like trying to do something kind of real time, it's not quite there yet because it does take a little bit of time. But you have to assume that that's going to improve rapidly. But basically, if you think about it, like anyone that needs to like look up systems, understand stuff, get information, run a weekly check, monitor the prices of many different websites. I mean, basically scraping, price monitoring, data updates, data capture, all these things become accessible to anybody. It's like, okay, I want to monitor these things. So think of Google Alerts on plus plus plus, basically, right? I want to check the prices for my competitors across these places, and I want to know immediately when something changes and be alerted of that. And most businesses being able to have the ability to kind of do that, or let's just say, for example, analyze our social media and go and create a report for us based on the social media around what's missing, and do an analysis across other people's competitors' social media, see like what we're missing. Again, like these sorts of like analyst tasks, reports, where you have to like go through lots of different things, create reports, create steps. A lot of that can be done, right? Like so.
I think I always you'll probably always hear me saying, especially on this podcast, that the jobs going away are not just admin jobs. It can be lawyers, accountants, brain surgeons with robotics. But actually, I think with computer use, it's kind of come back around to the beginning again. Is that a lot of the admin roles, which let's face it, are quite mundane and quite repetitive, will be automated very, very quickly. So the question is those people doing those things, they need to be reskilled, retrained, and kind of move up the kind of skill sort of food chain.
People
Really.
have to take that responsibility for themselves as well, right? Like I think
That's true. Yeah.
that's key, right? Like because you have to have like your own skill evolution, because otherwise roles will start getting redefined based on AI taking over parts of them, and then suddenly they're not required so much.
So what's your view then? So people find it hard to understand because, and they kind of glaze over and zone out when you talk about AI and AGI and ASI. So let's forget ASI, right? Because that's a whole different kettle of fish. But let's just say that in 2025, depending how they define, let's just say that AGI is an AI, a model that has this, its ability to understand the world, act, respond to data, respond to scenarios, understand our built environment, surpasses humans. So now it can do anything cognitively, or perhaps it's much better than us actually, that a human can do. So how do you see that? Well, I've got my views, but seeping into, if that's the right word, into the business environment, because it is a fundamental change.
Yeah, I mean, like, even right now, let me give an example. Like, so with Grok from Elon Musk
Yeah.
X.com, you can upload your MRI, or your CT scan or your blood results and everything, and it will give you pretty decent answers, and they're
I
improving that.
did that. I uploaded an ECG, had my annual health test. I thought,
So
I want to tell Elon Musk what my ECG looks like, but I uploaded it and it was pretty good.
so this is the thing, right? Like, anything which previously was paying for expertise, analysis, stuff like this, that's going to become commoditized, because a lot of those elements would be in medical, or in, let's say, financial, or let's say in any kind of regulatory or anything like this, where it requires going through a lot of information and analyzing it, that's going to become commoditized. So I think that's one dimension. In terms of other things, you've also got like other dimensions where it's going to be like businesses can start to say, okay, I have had several businesses which are smaller businesses. They've said to me, we want to grow, we don't want to hire more people. So I want to understand the dimensions in which we can actually do this. So there's going to be more and more smart, entrepreneurs which adapt to the changes, and they're going to be starting to like, okay, scale up their media, their online marketing, scale up their kind of like personalization, scale up different options and stuff like this. Those things will happen as well, basically. So I think that like it's going to, some things which people could charge for will disappear, and other things which they were not doing before is going to increase. And I think like, more and more than ever, trust, personal experience, all these things are going to become very important. But I think things are going to change quite dramatically over the next 6 months.
Yeah, so this podcast today really was about we were looking at the US election, the amount of money. I mean, it's just insane. This I saw Elon Musk is now he's raising $6 billion to go and buy a lot of GPUs. I mean, most venture capital now is just flowing into Nvidia, which is quite a nice business model. So Microsoft, they're recommissioning or backing the recommissioning of nuclear power stations. This is because they can see where this is going. And it's a winner takes all. But the point is, especially in the UK, for example, we don't have any of these big hyperscale players here, not any of the real big sort of model providers. Got a few specialist ones, the model providers. We've got some of the players are in chip technology, based here, or technologies at least. So you've got to think about how, if you're not in the technology, you've got to use technology and sort of sit above it and implement it. And we can't stress enough how quickly this is starting to move. And people say, in the kind of a trough of disillusionment, right? You have the odd one, and you may hear the news flow slows down, but often when it slows down, it means something's cooking. And one thing that I haven't quite got my head around yet is what Chat GPT 5 is going to look like. I mean, you've used O1 preview, like PhD, which is pretty good. Although I can't see massive difference between that and 4. But ChatGPT 5, I wonder if that will be what they define as AGI. That's what they're waiting for.
I think it'll be more like computer use plus, basically, right? I think it'll be able to control, more applications on your desktop, and it'll help people almost kind of understand the possibilities of like, nascent workflows and stuff like this. I think that's going to be the kind of next bit essentially. But I mean, already, these systems are very powerful. The question is now workflows. The question is not like the intelligence or whatever. The question now is like, how can you set up workflows which just work for you, basically, right? So that's where like businesses have got to like start rethinking from a human first, business to an AI first business, and just think like, okay, we're working as a team. How do we have the information flowing in the right way, and how do we set things up so it kind of will work further forward in that direction, essentially?
Yeah, and the businesses that we love working with are the ones that say, look, I hear you. We really want to sort of get on board with this AI stuff. And we understand that, and often the businesses that are kind of in growth mode, we understand that, we shouldn't really try and structure our business and operations as we have done in the past. So how do we start afresh almost? It can be quite complicated because things are in place and operating and, revenue flowing through it. But how do we restructure the business and our strategy to become, as you just said there, AI first? And I think they're the ones in the longer term, what we call an AI OS, an AI operating system. The ones that put that in place and build on it are the ones that are going to be the winners, especially when you start to see, and as I said, we're kind of toying with this now, you start to see computer use become extremely capable. So if computer use follows the same trajectory as, let's say, I don't know, text to video, right?
Or image analysis.
Or text to image, actually. That's even better example, actually. It's going from what it was, 18 months ago. It was a bit rubbish. It was a bit of fun. It was on TikTok, whatever it might be. To now, I was at a company the other day who said, we were talking to a company the other day, quite a large company, actually, hundreds of millions of revenue. And they're saying that they've saved a fortune in marketing because they don't use stock images anymore because it's just as good. I was with in the childcare sector, they're using these images a lot because they've, pictures of children that don't exist because they're not real, which makes so even there, if computer use follows that trajectory, then, let's just say within 18 months, you're not really going to need people doing admin. and PAs.
Look at avatar technology as well, right? Like for example, like the speed, like so now you've got like API driven avatars. So like a digital twin of you could be talking how you want, analyze, respond, do almost a FaceTime call with you and everything. And maybe 7 months ago it was like 9 months ago it was like, okay, you can speak in different languages and that's cool and that's already like I think we are
What do you
sleeping
call
on
it?
a
The
lot of
valley, uncanny valley, is it?
yeah, but I'm saying, but
It's not
the rate of
quite there, but it's
improvement,
getting there.
but the rate of improvement is there. You understand that, like so it's very very powerful time. So I think this episode was about recalibrating, understanding the lie of the land, and seeing where you are and making sure that you're on track. Because when you get these systems in place in your business, then basically you are hitching your company to an exponential world. Because
Yeah,
as
absolutely
technology
right. Yeah.
as technology improves, you're brought up with it. But if you're not hitched to it, you're detached from all that, and the distance becomes harder and harder to gain.
Yeah, absolutely right. And there's more and more money. There's no slowdown being poured into this. So a couple of things. So one is, when it's you as an individual, and we still do lots of events, and I ask the room, how many people in the room use Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT personally, just to augment yourself. Ask things, talk to it, use it to just do the basic things that you do personally. But even write letters, 5-10% usually put their hand up, right? And if you're one of the people, if you're one of the 90 to 95% that's not putting their hand up, then you need to be, because that will help you understand the power of this technology. Secondly, in your business, then as Aalok said, if you're not hitched up to this exponential sort of change, it's going to be harder and harder to catch up. That's what we try and do in our business. And then the last one really is this is a shout out to policymakers, is you can't base policy, fiscal policy, economic policy, education policy,
Bring that
technology
horse's balls.
policy, any policy, yeah, by looking at the past, that linear path. You've got to look forwards up at that sort of exponential curve, that kind of vertical line. I think, how do we as a nation embrace this technology to stay ahead and get ahead? So if you're new to our podcast, this was more of a sort of a scene set, as Aalok said. We provide managed AI agents. We sign up for our newsletter, the AI Insider. We're getting one out this week. Sign up to my newsletter as well. We've got demos. We've got a resource center. We've got this podcast. We put a lot of sort of content out on LinkedIn as well. So follow us, follow our content, engage with us, and hopefully you can learn a lot more about how you build an AI-assisted organization, because things are both, I find it incredibly exciting, but also sometimes I wake up and look at the next development and find it incredibly sort of unnerving, really, because there are things happening that we see and we find it tiring trying
I
to
look
keep
at
up with it.
education. I was talking to some people
Education, we should do a whole podcast on that.
that's like the skills you need now are very different. But I mean that's another conversation of the day.
Let's have a conversation another day. So that was it for today. You know where we are. This is the AI Assisted Organization podcast with myself, Piers and Aalok Shukla. We'll be publishing another one every sort of 2 weeks, and we'll see you then.
See you then.